While Alan Moore and J.H. Williams' Promethea, published from 1999 to 2005, is not one of Moore's most remembered works, it's not because the author wasn't at the top of his game. Kumar and Emmet find it to be entrancing, even if you don't buy into the various magical and spiritual elements that Moore put into it. This week, episode 591, a flashback episode from April 30th, 2018. First, I'd like to thank our patrons for helping to keep the show going. You can join them by going to patreon.com/deconcomics and pledging a small monthly donation. At $4 a month, you can hear our monthly podcast on Jim Starlin's Captain Marvel run. Or if you'd rather give a one-time donation, you can do so via PayPal by sending it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
This is Kumar.
And this is Emmet.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Kumar and Emmet. We're both in Melbourne, but we're on Skype today. Because we already had to look each other in the face once this week, so that's... maybe that's our limit. I don't know. It's just easy. So we're going to talk about Promethea, by Alan Moore and J.H. Williams III, and Mick Gray, and colorist Jeremy Cox, and lettered by... the guy that always letters them.
Mr. Todd.
Yes, Todd Klein. And occasional assists on art by Jose Villarrubia, and who's the guy that draws all the fairy comics and operas.
Oh, yes. Mr. I help Neil Gaiman occasionally.
Yes, okay, so. That guy.
P. Craig, it's not P.
Craig Russell. There you go, P. Craig Russell. Okay. So,
we did our research, people.
Well, I did, normally you name the penciler, the writer and the penciler at the top of the show, and this time it was like, this is really a collaborative effort, which we're going to talk about. We have to cover the fact that even the letterer and even the guest artists are all really, it doesn't work unless every piece is in place. And, but I'm going to swear a lot during this episode, and sometimes I'm going to swear with joy, and sometimes I'm going to swear in anger, because the reason we are 15 years late talking about Promethea is because this is another character which nobody expected DC has decided to exploit, against all sanity and any respect towards Alan Moore. It's almost like they're trying to rub it in his face. The fact that his most brilliant works, they're exploiting them in a way like, well, we can do this better. And it reminds me of that when Sandman came out, and then there was that Sleepwalker came out from Marvel, and there was an editor at Marvel who said it was Sandman done right, and that's almost like the mindset I feel, and it's almost like belligerent the way that DC is. So they've got Promethea has reappeared in the DC universe.
Correct.
In Justice League, right?
Yes, it's Steve Orlando and Neil Edwards. Justice League 24 is the issue where she's mostly featured. Okay. It's part of a storyline involving the Queen of Fables, who I believe is a Mark Waid character. Okay. So there's a couple of writers' work being featured in this storyline, and the villain of the piece is trying to invade Immateria, which is mentioned before Promethea appears. So she's going to invade Immateria because she's the Queen of Fables, and once she's there, she can control all of humanity. That's her. She's trying to revenge herself on humanity for the death of her sister Freya, who was an ice queen. And the scenes between her and her sister. I thought I was reading a comic book adaptation of Frozen. Because it's pretty much the same thing. It's like if the sister in Frozen was really evil and became an evil story.
Oh my god.
Because that's what Queen of Fables is. She can only exist if you believe in her, and she grants you a wish. And then once she manifests in our reality, she can become more powerful because then we are afraid of her. And what's interesting, I just because the whole reason we're talking, as you say, is because Promethea reappeared in a DC comic, and we were like, oh, let's talk about Promethea. Let's do a show all about Promethea. And I was up for it. I was really happy to do this with you, Kumar. And I read through the entire 32-issue run of Promethea in a single sitting. I got all the books out from the library. I just plowed through it. It was a wonderful day. And then it occurred to me afterwards, wait a minute, I think I should read the actual comics that this new Promethea has appeared in. And I'm reading all of what I've just described.
I'm glad you took that bullet.
Yeah, all I've just described to you, the Queen of Fables, an evil story, evil stories become more powerful, people are afraid of them. All that stuff is kind of interesting. Like, you can see that Steve Orlando, in his script, he's setting the scene for the return of Promethea, and he's trying to engage with the themes of the book Alan Moore did. But I immediately have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Because the notion that this Queen of Fables is going to invade Immateria, I don't see what the problem is. Because if a story enters Immateria, it just becomes another story.
Right.
It's just part of this world of imagination.
Yeah, so fundamentally the writer has not understood what Prometheus is about. Just like all the Watchmen stuff, the people don't understand what Watchmen is about.
Well, I mean, it's one of two things. It's either they don't understand, which is a possibility, or they've basically been given an edict.
Yes.
All right, here's your marching orders, use Promethea. And he's done his best to try and integrate some of those themes into this story. And it's not that he doesn't understand, it's just that he's approaching it in a very literal way, because that's how these comics work.
I'm going to...
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think what Moore did with Promethea was he did a superhero comic that actually becomes a lecture on magic. So superhero is a metaphor for what he wants to talk about, which is magic. Whereas here we have the metaphor of stories being bigger than us and transcending us, being literalized as a superhero story. It's the reverse of the Promethea project. And it's only 2 or 3 issues long.
Yeah. The thing I want to say was I'm going to make a very cynical assessment of this, which is that someone in the conglomerate is pitching a Promethea movie. They've got a library of IPs. Somebody has pitched it, and in order to sell it, they need to materialize it in a comic book that they can show to someone. So that they can get
I don't agree. I think it's even worse than that. I think it's I think it's trademark use.
Oh, that too.
They need to use the character within a certain amount of time after acquiring the character.
Right.
So Promethea and Tom Strong are both appearing in comics this year because ABC was acquired by DC when Jim Lee sold Wildstorm, or brought it across with him to DC. And as a result, they are owned properties. But in order to, I think, comic history is full of examples of books that weren't reused or the title wasn't exercised on them. And I am not claiming to be an expert on this, but this is my sense of what's happening.
Okay.
So they have to basically publish a comic featuring Promethea within a certain time span in order to keep the character in use.
This is part of the whole bummer about it, too, is that so there were these 5 titles that Alan Moore had planned, and he had this line called ABC Comics. It's going to be owned by him, published by Jim Lee.
America's best comics.
America's best comics.
For a time, they were.
Yeah, and they were going to be published by Jim Lee, and what happened was Jim Lee, in a super sellout move, decided to sell himself to DC, the man who had left DC and Marvel and said, screw you, in 92 with Image Comics. Anyway, he decided to sell, and he's like, okay, Alan Moore, I'm selling everything. You know, you can drop out if you want. Now, at this stage, the rights for League of Extraordinary Gentlemen the movie rights had been sold. So, because of that legal tie-up, Alan Moore retained the rights to League, but everything else got sold to DC. So they're owned by DC. Now, there's supposed to be a firewall, which meant you would never see DC logos on the books, and he would never get checks from DC. That wall started to crumble, and eventually you started seeing the Vertigo logo on some of these books and things like that, and now the whole thing is being sucked over, and even J.H. Williams III did not know about any of the current stuff that is happening, and he was kind of shocked
I mean, that's where I come back to the whole trademark thing, because
Right.
for me, this is not malicious in principle. I think there is a degree of bloody mindedness about it from some of the individuals involved, but I think this is simply a corporation exercising its rights over property, and they do not care about the creators involved. And look, you know, we can wring our hands and pull our hair out over this, but ultimately that's what it comes down to. They don't matter. They're not relevant. It's about
Yes.
money. It's about who owns what, who continues to own what, and like that's all it is.
Yes.
So yeah, they could have done the decent thing, and it always comes back to this question of ethics. They could have done the decent thing and informed the parties involved, hey, by the way, just so you know, there's nothing you can do to stop it, but we're exercising title.
Right.
They could have done that, but they didn't. And as a result, they actually suffered a PR backlash, and this podcast was planned as a result.
I'm going to say despite all the before Watchmen and the Doomsday Clock bullshit that's going on, which feels, to me, I mean, you can say about it, feels, in my heart, it feels malicious. It doesn't matter what the corporate reasons for it are. It feels like they're not doing this to anyone else. They're doing it to Alan Moore all the time. And for me, this feels worse than Watchmen. And I think the reason is because Promethea turned into I felt like a very intensely personal conversation between Alan Moore and the reader. And even between Alan Moore and me. Like, this was a book that went into my soul. And I feel like Watchmen was a super brilliant jewel of a comic book, and them exploiting that and being dumb about it is a kind of a different animal than them exploiting this and being dumb about it, because they're really dumb about it, because they are not, that writer's not trying to have a personal conversation about what the definition of magic is and how it has affected their life and what it means to them in a very thinly veiled superhero context, and transmitting that to the reader.
Yeah, I just, for the benefit of the listener, last night I shared one of the panels from the Justice League issue with Kumar, and it was the most on-the-nose piece of dialogue. And you know, I am the spirit of the imagination, I think it was.
Yeah.
And at one point, somebody actually says that they describe Immateria as a land of pure imagination, and I was just, oh wow, it's Willy Wonka. It's like, that's where we're at. But again, I think the opportunity we have, and I'm really glad to hear you express your feelings on what Promethea meant to you, is to talk about how important that series was. I mean, it's 32 issues. It's not a long run, but it packs in so much, and not just Moore's sort of reflections on what magic is and how various story creators, be they poets, be they writers, be they artists, be they comic creators, how they use their imagination to try and express something that's bigger than them to their audience. Not only is it that, it's J.H. Williams and, as you said, all the other collaborators on the book really pushing the envelope in terms of what a comic book in its art can do. There's so much mimicry of other artists. There's so much use of panel spacing and page layout that is really mind-blowing. Well, it's a wonderful discussion on comics.
Oh, yeah. And as we were talking about when we were forced to look at each other in the face a few days ago, I don't understand how these 6 or 7 people possibly could communicate with each other about what needs to happen in every corner of every panel. Like, the balloon needs to be this shape and it needs to go here. And there's one panel which is like split in two where Sophie, who is the alter ego of Promethea and vice versa, has a Promethea persona taken out of her. And half of it, so the panel split, it's kind of, there's a panel split in between, and half of her is Promethea and half is Sophie, but they're colored in different ways and the lettering's in different ways, and there's all sorts of stuff going on between the two panels. And I was just like, how did they, you know, even if you're on the phone with someone, it's so complex and it's so difficult to, it's an amazing, there's so many gears going on. And then not only that, but I mean, some of the layouts or some of the things that Moore is requiring the artist to pull off is so complex. Like the Mobius strip page, where there's this page that's, they're walking all around a track that's, you know, suspended in midair, but it's in the shape of a Mobius strip, so they're going upside down and then right side up, and they're coming back around. And the conversation has to loop as well, and they have to be in the right position, and you have to turn, and as I've often said in many Alan Moore episodes, it reads better in single issues, because you got to flip this thing upside down to kind of read it in the right order. And I just think it's phenomenal. And going back to the personal effect thing,
yeah,
Alan Moore's thesis, and it has been for many years, not just in Promethea, is that the definition of magic is art which alters the consciousness of the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never had this experience in anything else before, but he did it in this comic. He created a piece of art which altered my state of consciousness, because it is, especially between issues 12 and 24, it is a total drug experience without taking any drugs. And it took me, I don't know how you read 32 issues in one day, because it took me an hour to read each one, trying to unpack, to parse the text and the art and understand everything that was coming at me. And the art was so psychedelic, and it was coming into me, and every issue, I was literally in a different state of mind, and that's exactly what his definition of art is, and the book is what it says it does. And to me, that hasn't happened before or since.
And just to explain to those who maybe haven't read the series, these issues that Kumar just mentioned, 12 to 24, that is when the characters go on a trip up the Tree of Life through the various Sephiroth. And each issue is dedicated to a different point along this system of the Kabbalah. And I think he merges the Kabbalah and the Tarot. He draws a parallel between the two of them.
Yes.
And it's more or less Alan Moore lecturing us on his philosophical system based on readings of Aleister Crowley, who features quite heavily in this, Austin Osman Spare, another occultist who features very heavily in this, and a number of pieces of fiction which he's drawing into this as a sort of way of illustrating his ideas. And each issue is not only done in a different art style to reflect the environment they're in, but it creates a different mood. So there are certain Sephiroth which are very aggressive, so there's a heavy use of red. And there's even a negative Sephiroth, which is like a hell dimension, if you like. And that's aggressively red. And you feel that when you're reading it. Like, it conveys to you the emotion of these spaces. But then there's a beautiful... there's one issue which is all in blue. It's really soft blues. It's like a Van Gogh print. The cover was this very memorable Van Gogh riff by J.H. Williams III. And that's very peaceful, and it gives you a sense of calm. And so there's a very deliberate use of color and style and reference to cloak this lecture that Moore is giving us in something more meaningful. Like, he's using the comic book as a way of trying to see the ideas rather than simply being... I know a lot of people criticize this run for being didactic, but the fact that he was able to create this sensory experience around that makes it more meaningful.
Yeah.
So it's not just a bore, like lecturing you on his, this is what I understand magic to be. Like, you don't have to take his system on. You don't have to believe in magic to get a sense of what he's saying.
Oh, yeah, I agree, because I mean the Kabbalah stuff, which goes on really for 12 issues, and the Tarot stuff, which is all tied up, I don't buy it for a second, and I don't give a shit about it. But I totally bought it when I was in there. I had to live it. And even the fact that every page is a two-page layout, a two-page spread, affects the reading of it, affects how you physically engage with it. And, I've mentioned issue 32, I think, on this podcast before, which is it's this crazy issue where you read the pages beginning 1 to 32, you read every page, beginning to end, front to back. But then, you undo the staples, you pull the issue apart, which I did. You pull it apart at the staples, you lay them all out, and it forms two giant pictures, a two-sided poster of Promethea's face. But you can read the same pages in a different order, but it still flows through the same points in a different direction. And it's the most phenomenal, dazzling, formalist thing I've ever seen in comics. And it forces you to physically engage with it. You cannot do it without physically becoming a part of the experience.
I read the series in its original run, issue by issue, back in the 2000s. But I left them behind in Ireland. I don't have them with me. So I went to the library to take out all 5 volumes to
research for this podcast. And the last volume, you have issue 32, and you've got that, because it's in a graphic novel, you've just got the page. And I was like, oh, that's a shame. I
actually miss the experience of, as you said, removing the staples and laying it all on my bedroom floor and like poring over this discussion of Einstein and Crowley and magic and physics and this really erudite
like reflection, I want to say, not a lecture. But at the back of the graphic novel, some generous soul has actually folded all the different pages and you can remove it from the back, and you can do that same thing again.
Right.
So you got 2 copies of issue 32 in the graphic novel, which is nice.
Right.
It's nice little touch.
Yeah.
I think the other thing as well is one of my favorite issues was issue 22, and that's the one that's all like white gray, like every page is white gray.
Yeah. And
it's also because everyone talks about the issue where Promethea and Felix Faust have sex, because you've got that why is the superheroine having sex with this creepy old dude? And it was, it's really grotty and disgusting. And in the course of the issue itself, Felix Faust says, well, look, you can choose to look at this as being disgusting, or you can choose to look at this as a goddess and having sex in the sky, and that's what we're doing. It's all about how you perceive this event. And it's a lecture on how sex can be magical.
Yeah.
And then in issue 22, we have an issue-length discussion of the Big Bang. which again, in both magical terms and in an attempt at drawing in our understanding of the origins of the universe. But if you read it, he paces the entire issue to be like sex. So it starts off really fast, and then, we all know what sex is. Anyway, but the characters they keep talking about how they feel and how it feels so good, and oh my god, I feel amazing. And the rhythm of it increases and increases and increases, and it's just so funny.
Yeah. Well,
he's having such a good time.
Yeah. I have to say, issue 10 is really funny too, and 10, that first sex issue is the first sign that Promethea is going to be something different. So we get the first 9 issues, and I kind of felt like... So Alan Moore started this project called Glory for Rob Liefeld in the late 90s, and that became an aborted project after 1 or 2 issues. And it seemed like it was going to be a kind of thing about magic and the Tree of Life and stuff like that, and it kind of fell apart. And I feel like he kind of picked up those themes in Promethea, and you get the first 9 issues, and it kind of looks a bit like it's going to be a smart, fun superhero comic like the rest of the ABC line. And, there's kind of this super team there called the Five Swell Guys, and there's a bad guy called the Painted Doll, and there's this kind of stuff going, and it's all fine and all, but it has a kind of 80s vibe as well, like it's very dense, like American Flag or even Transmetropolitan or something like that.
Yes, because you've got this sheer immersion in media, even to the point where you've got the weeping gorilla cartoons.
Yes, you got
the back of the panel.
You got to pay attention to a lot of stuff in every panel. There's news reports and the weeping gorilla, all that stuff's going on. And then you get to issue 10, which is a bit of a throwback to the Swamp Thing sex issue.
Yeah.
And there's this funny thing, and I don't know if I didn't notice it the first time, but I laughed so hard. So Promethea shows up, so she's like, whenever she turns up, she's got all these sparkles and kind of stars floating around her, and she's this kind of beautiful being. And Faust goes down on her, and there's the next panel, you see he's come away, and there's all these stars floating around his mouth. And I thought it was I don't know if I never noticed it the first time, but it was the funniest thing I think Moore's ever written. It was almost like he was making fun of his own writing.
Yeah.
With this moment. I thought it was just, brilliant. But then issue 12 is when they go up the Kabbalah, and I don't remember Moore ever really changing course. Like, you read interviews with him about Watchmen. He said around issue 2 or 3 we knew he had something special. But when you read Watchmen, you don't really feel a change. And in From Hell, he says he wrote that line where he says the only place gods inarguably exist is in our minds, and that changed Alan Moore's life. But you don't really feel like the book changes. But in Promethea, issue 12 hits, and it's like, haha, I tricked you. I changed my mind. I'm going to make it about the Kabbalah instead of the superhero stuff. And it's transformative. So for 12 issues, you go up the Tree of Life, and it's just like, what are we reading? This is not a superhero thing at all. In fact, the two leads are a half-Hispanic college student possessed by an Iraqi myth being and a plus-size middle-aged Hispanic woman, which is not what you normally get in superhero comics in 1999. And but what struck me this time was that actually they come back to the superhero stuff, which I've kind of forgotten all about somehow. Around issue 25, they come back to the real world, and it seems like there's been this ongoing thing about Promethea is going to end the world, so there are various parties trying to stop her. And then it gets kind of a bit weird, like the other ABC superheroes show up, and there's kind of superhero stuff going on, and FBI stuff, and all this stuff that had been kind of forgotten in the first 11 issues comes back. And so it kind of shifts gears again in a strange way. I'm not sure what to make of it. I'm still deciding if I don't know if it was a good idea or not. Like, I don't know if any of that stuff... I feel like if he... In a sense, it worked out because he got 32 issues, which is the number of paths and spheres on the tree, which was an amazing... That's the most formalist thing you can do. And it kind of makes sense in that respect, but I kind of feel like he changed course, and I initially felt like maybe he regretted that earlier stuff, because even the mayor of New York gets possessed by all these demons, which is very similar to the Matt Cable thing from Swamp Thing as well. And I was kind of like, well, what's all the point of this? But it gets kind of funny because the big bad guy shows up, and he's going to kill Promethea, and she just kind of talks him. She's talking to every human on Earth at this stage in a complicated plot point, which we'll probably get to. But she just kind of talks him out of it. There's no superhero ending to it. It's very... I think there's 3 very distinct stages in the book, and I think the third part is the strangest for that reason.
Yeah, but doesn't it sort of reflect their passage up along the Sephiroth? Because towards the top, when we get to the realm of wands and everything, which is issue 22 and all that, coming and going, as they say, you've got this notion of masculine drive and masculine power is based on aggression and just pushing on. And the superhero genre is very masculine. And then it is confronted with Promethea, ready to end the world, and she's saying, no, you imagine the end of the world to be this destructive event, because that's the only thing you can conceive of. You see the end of the world as meaning your deaths. I'm giving you the end of the world as a form of revelation.
Right.
That how we see our reality is limited because we're just driving forward. I'm going to give you a broader reality, and that's the end of your world. And I think that's what the superhero crossover pastiche, where America's Best reunite to stop Promethea. The FBI are joining up with them, and they're going to assassinate her if they can, and it goes horribly wrong. And all they've done is provoke her into finalizing that, because Sophie doesn't want to end the world, because Sophie is convinced that this is a bad thing. And then she realizes when she becomes Promethea again, it's like, no, actually, this needs to happen.
So do you feel like it was set up from the beginning? Like, I just said that I think he changed course, but do you think that was the course from day one?
Very early in the series, we have discussions being had between characters sort of on the periphery, because Sophie doesn't quite know what they're talking about, or is not present, that Promethea will cause the end of the world. Like, very early on.
Yes.
And she's referred to as the Whore of Babylon by the Temple, who I love. They're the would-be Christian death cult that's behind everything, are like a bunch of oldies in a squash club. You know, that's who they are. And their privilege is what they're protecting. They are rich white people.
Yeah.
And their perspective is so limited. This is all they can do, and they just see her as a threat. That's all they can see. So very early on, there's this notion of the end of the world, the apocalypse is destructive, and as we then go into the Sephiroth journey, Promethea is separated from Sophie at one point, and goes off with her father, who sent her off into the desert when she was a child, to finally teach her what he wanted. What he was trying to accomplish way back when the Christians killed him for practice of magic. And the idea is that she is a concept, she is an idea that will bring about the end of the world, but it's the end of the Christian world, which is good, evil, suffering, poverty, all these things. And Promethea is like, no, life is brother. Because as we talked about previously, we learn that even after Promethea brings about this revelation, there are people who still refuse to acknowledge that it's happened.
Oh, yeah.
So there is a choice. Like, you still have a choice. It's just the domination of the vast majority of people by this simplistic good-evil dynamic has been removed. Like, they get to experience life in its fullest.
Right. So, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm finished.
Okay, I was going to say it's one of my favorite lines. So, the apocalypse happens, right? Which is, an apocalypse happens in Watchmen and Miracle Man as well. And here, the apocalypse...
And in Providence.
Right, I haven't read that yet. I'm getting to it.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
that's all right. I was expecting it. But, so there's it's kind of a revelation of... So it's literally revelation.
Yes.
And she tells everyone that basically, the Big Bang happens... And this is another interesting thing, too, because at the time I read this, 1999 to 2002 or 3 or whatever, I really didn't know anything about theoretical physics or particle physics. And in the past 10 years, I've been reading a lot of books about that stuff. I've become very interested in it. And rereading it this time, I guess I just didn't notice those lines or I ignored them or what. But he doesn't say there's nothing in here that contradicts what we know scientifically. It's very interesting how he ties it into our knowledge of the four fundamental forces and how the universe was formed and all this stuff. But she makes the point that, there's one single explosion, all the forces come out of that Big Bang, all the radiation and the particles are formed out of that, and we're all part of that same thing. And the whole point of this 32 issues is we're all connected. And at the end, there's the line she says, which is, everybody had the revelation, but not everybody understood it or took any notice of it. And it's like, that is Promethea. Some people read Promethea, some people got it, not everybody understood it, and lots of people took no notice of it. And that's exactly what it is. But I find it very interesting, too, that in that issue 31, which is, basically the last issue, it switches to standard comic book pages. Which we have not seen. We haven't seen a single thing that was not a 2-page layout in some form with the border completely, full bleed pages right to the edges of every single page. This is the first time you just see square panels. And I don't know quite what to make of that. But
isn't that sort of like this is how life goes now? This is the reassertion of the status quo, that now life goes on, so now we're going back to normal formatting pages?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. But it is sort of like life goes on and some people are going to be the better for it. Nobody's going to be worse off, I guess, but some people are going to be nicer to the people around them because they read it and they got it. And it's like, get along with everybody because we all came out of the same, blast from the same singularity or whatever.
Coming up, the Scrabble issue of Promethea, the art of J.H. Williams, sex and unsexualized nudity, aspects of Promethea that are short but effective and terrible but funny, and more. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. We really appreciate your support.
Hello, I'm Ken Holzhauser, and if you're looking for something new in comic books, may I recommend my newest comic, The Quick and the Dad, a love letter to the DC, Marvel, Archie, and Harvey comics of my youth. This comic has everything. It has spaceships, dad jokes, alien invasions, time travel, supervillains, and so many bad puns. Hopefully you'll like it. It's the cutest comic you've never heard of, and it's available today in print and digital from indieplanet.com. That's The Quick and the Dad. Join that other dynamic duo, won't you?
Yeah, there was a couple of things. There's little quirks in this series as well that I just love so much. Like, okay, so we were talking about the apocalypse and the revelation. Characters keep eating a breakfast cereal called how do I pronounce this?
A chocolate pops or chocolates pops?
Chocolates pops. Yeah, yeah. So the idea of the apocalypse in pop culture is this something you should be afraid of, but it's almost become mundane.
Yes.
Like, he's basically telling us that we're not going to do the same old apocalypse. We're not going to do the same old Armageddon. I'm going to do something interesting here, you know?
Yeah.
And at the time, I remember comparing it a lot to when I was reading it first time around. There's an Irish novel by James Stephens called Crock of Gold, which is all about the god Pan falls in love with a shepherdess, and then her people are trying to get her back and trying to bring her back to a good Christian life. But she's gone off into this pagan world with Pan and discovering sex and everything. And then at the end of the book, it turns into a joyful apocalypse. There's the destruction of the Christian worldview, and then the pagan worldview sort of takes over. And it's like James Stephens just sort of saying the Irish should celebrate their pagan heritage and get away from this negative religion, which is Catholicism. And I was like, I wonder if Alan Moore's read The Crock of Gold, because it's very similar, just that progress and that the idea of sex positivity being related to paganism. So there's stuff like that in there that I really enjoyed. I had this idea in my head. Oh, sorry. I also want to mention Hecate, who is the whore of Babylon, who Promethea takes on the aspect of. She's drawn to look like Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah.
You know, I'm ready for my close-up.
Yeah.
She's looking directly at the panel.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of addressing of the panel. There are moments where, like, Hermes talks to the...
Yeah.
Hermes notices us.
Yeah.
I think Grace at one point says, who do you think you're spying on, you grubby little adolescent? And she's looking to panel, and we turn the page, and it's Kenneth psychically looking into... Is it Barbara's mind? He's with Barbara in the hospital, or is it Sophie? He's in the hospital, and he's psychically linked to their experience in immateria, and Grace sees him, but we think she's talking to us.
Yes.
So there's and that happens a few times.
Yeah.
There was also, I got a bit of a chill when I was reading it during my splurge there the other week, where they talk about the world ending in 2017.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're saying the world is on track to end in 2017, and I think there was an issue. The issue released in November 2002. The two characters, Barbara and Sophie, look to panel again. They say, "There's something happening in the world. It feels like something's gone really wrong." And then they look at us, and this is just when, around the same time where the invasion of Iraq was in full speed, and there was this sense that we were heading into permanent conflict and what was happening, and there was a lot of fear at that time, a lot of protest marches, and again, there's a dialogue happening with the reader, as you said, like Moore is talking to us, but we're being sort of reminded that we're reading a comic book and maybe think, okay, what is this comic book trying to tell us? And it's confrontational in a way. Like, are you listening to what I'm telling you? Kind of, that seems to be what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I did feel towards the end of the climb up the tree, I was only reading 1 or 2 issues a day, but I was starting to lose track of what each sphere was. And it almost, like, I was still in the dazzled phase. I was still amazed by what was coming out of every issue, but it was like I couldn't keep track of, this sphere symbolizes this or that. Like I said, it's super dense, and I guess it's the type of, any super dense comic like that is a type of comic I struggle with anyway. I'm kind of amazed I took in as much as I did.
It's also very funny. I think the use of humor.
Yeah.
Like again, Grace. I love Grace, and when Grace and Stacia get together, that's my jam. I love that stuff. But Grace describing magic, and now it's all sigils, stubble, and self-abuse, which. Because she's saying, like, have a bit of fun with it. Like, have some style. She's from the jazz era. So she's saying, what's wrong with, like, putting on a nice suit and like, trying to look good? Whereas Moore seems to be having a crack at the Invisibles Wankathon?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of knocks between the two magicians. I interpreted Zatanna by Ryan Sook and Grant Morrison as a sort of reply to Promethea.
Oh, right. Okay.
Where it was like, you don't need to read all those bloody books.
Yeah.
Just wish for a better reality. Make the world a better place. I am talking to you. My hand is pressed against the comic page. Touch me. Okay. Cool, Grant. No worries.
I do feel like Alan Moore covered a lot of the same ground in in Jerusalem. But it's much more succinct here. Like it's contained, and it's kind of the same message, and it's more explosive with the art as well. It's amazingly effective. I also want to talk a little bit about issue 12, which is the first one where it's like, you know what, you've been along for the superhero stuff, but now I'm going to hit you in the face. Now, this is it's called Metaphor, but it's what I call the Scrabble issue. So, this is an issue where he's got, he takes the 22, so it's a 24-page comic, and he takes which is convenient, and he takes the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the 22 cards of the tarot in order. So each page is one Hebrew letter, one tarot card. And he's got the letters of Promethea on Scrabble tiles, and on every page he reorders them into another anagram, so then there's the dialogue on the page. So Promethea is talking to the two snakes on her staff.
Mickey and Mackie. Right. Mickey and Mac, which is micro and macro.
Yes, Mick and Mac, micro and macro, right. They are talking in rhyming couplets on each page, and they are describing the birth of the universe from the Big Bang to present history, or even to the end, to apocalypse, in order. And whatever they're describing matches what's on the tarot card. So the tarot cards are in the order of the universe as well. Can be interpreted, are interpreted in that way. And the Scrabble tile anagrams, which are only really limited to the word Promethea also, and use every tile on every page, match up with the theme being described in the tarot cards. And there's also a joke being told by Aleister Crowley at the bottom throughout the issue, piece by piece, which
he's getting older each page.
He's getting older, and the joke sometimes matches, the stage of the joke sometimes matches the theme of the tarot and the Scrabble tiles and the state of the history of the universe. Now, I haven't read these Justice League issues, but I don't know if they're gonna.
It's not as dense.
No, really. I can't think of even that issue 5 of Watchmen that goes from front to back. This is inconceivable to me. How did he do it?
There's multiple levels. Each page has multiple levels, as you've just outlined in depth. And reading it, like as you said, like how did I do it in a day? But that issue, that took me, like, just revisiting it again. And as I was trying to say before, when I was reading the original issues of Promethea, I studied every issue, like each one. So reading in the trade form for me wasn't a big deal, because I was plugging back into those memories, those sense memories of reading those initial issues, and like poring over them and tracking down all the references and reading books that are mentioned in passing, looking up poems, looking up philosophy that's mentioned in passing. And the Aleister Crowley stuff as well, I think it needs to be said that this is one of the most sympathetic depictions of Crowley
Yes.
that I've ever encountered, outside of maybe Cosmic Trigger, where Robert Anton Wilson sort of tries to approach what Crowley was getting at as metaphor. He's saying a lot of what he's doing is he's just trying to scare the straights. Like, he's just trying to get rid of people who are dull and boring, and he's trying to talk to people maybe with a little more imagination. And this is why he's using metaphor. And Moore seems to be, even the title of this issue, Metaphor, following the same line of thought. And I find that really rewarding. Just to, like, not necessarily to say Aleister Crowley was a good guy. He wasn't. He was a monster. But what he was saying was a way of trying to break us out of one way of thinking.
Yes.
And Moore is using him as a vehicle for that. And Crowley keeps reappearing throughout this series as different versions of himself and different versions, and interacting with the tarot and with the Kabbalah as a way of sort of latching on to that idea. And this one issue is almost like a statement of intent for everything that's going to follow. And the snake dance comes up a bunch of times as well. The woman dancing with the snake, which is our transcendent selves, our imaginative selves, and our physical self, which is the snakes, which represent our DNA, the strands of our DNA, and Mick and Mac and all the rest of it. So I noticed later in the series when Promethea is basically being suppressed by Sophie. She doesn't want to become Promethea anymore, and she's got a dead-end job, and she's got a nice, pleasant boyfriend.
Oh God, I loved him.
Yeah, he was so. Yeah, he was.
He was me. Like if I was in that situation, yeah.
and when they have sex, you can see he's got the snake tattoos on his arms.
Yeah.
So the snakes are wrapped around her again. So it's that same idea that keeps coming back of the snakes representing our natural ourselves in the world and our matter, if you like, and then the transcendent self, which is Promethea, which is the imagination. So this issue sort of primes us for everything that's going to follow. All the information you need about the quest is in this issue, I believe. But it's a dense read.
I think Alan Moore was almost prepping himself, because I did read an interview with him about this issue, and I don't know why more people haven't interviewed him about Promethea. It's almost ignored, almost. Like, I don't remember very any interviews at the time talking about, especially at the end of it. I wish somebody had talked to him after issue 32 about the whole series. But he did an interview with Eddie Campbell, and he talked about the metaphor, the Scrabble issue, or whatever you want to call it. And Moore says he didn't know that he could do it when he started. He's just like, okay, I have this idea. I'm going to try to pull it off. It wasn't like he tried it and failed and came up with another idea for the issue. He was like, I'm going to try to pull this thing off. And he just went in there savant-like and just somehow managed to do it. I mean, to me, the Scrabble thing is the hardest. I know you could stretch the tarot to describe the birth and death of the universe. I guess anybody could do that. Maybe. But the anagrams, to me, was really phenomenal.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And just again, I think you're right, he's setting himself challenges.
Yes.
And it's just really rewarding to see somebody really push themselves. And again, we haven't talked enough about the art, but like J.H. Williams, again, each issue, he's pushing himself. He's trying to match what's in that script, but then he's trying to bring his sensibility to it as well. And so this is a work of collaboration where you've got two people deciding, all right, let's use this series as an opportunity to really force ourselves to go beyond maybe what we have done in the past. Good enough. Let's not just be good enough. Let's be amazing.
Well, I don't know J.H. Williams III from anything else. I never saw his work before or after, but I do feel like it was an organic situation where they started doing the superhero thing, and I think Alan Moore saw the art and said, wait a second, I can push this guy.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, there's you always hear these stories about the artist collaborating with Alan Moore, and one of my favorites is Kyle Baker. And Alan Moore had that ink character. What was his name? He's
Splash
Brannigan, who's kind of a Plastic Man character, all right?
Yes.
And Alan Moore handpicked Kyle Baker, and Kyle Baker was like, why do you want me to draw this thing? And he drew it, and he hit it out of the ballpark, and then he was like, actually, I do love this, and then he went on to work on Plastic Man. And it's almost like one of those things where Alan Moore sees the thing in the artist that they don't see in themselves.
Yeah.
And he somehow gets it out of them. And
I mean, you mentioned you haven't read a lot of J.H. Williams. I mean, he had done some Batman stuff before this. He had done, like, it's good, it's clean. His art's very clean and structured. But after Promethea, he did Batwoman with Greg Rucka.
Yeah.
And, like, the style of almost the stained glass window framing of panels that is in Promethea, that just became his thing.
Right.
He just, like, and it was sort of like, I can do this.
So it transformed him as an artist, much as it transformed Kyle Baker. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And, like, Batwoman, I think, again, it's another book which is celebrated more for the art than for the storytelling, which is also good, but it's known as the amazing looking comic from the 2000s, where you've got this woman who's adopted the persona of the Bat, but she uses a red wig, so there's lots of red and black. The use of color in it's astonishing. Like, it's a really beautiful book. So yeah, that's J.H. Williams unleashed after Promethea, transformed. He heard Promethea's message. Yeah. He's opened himself up to a wider array of options. No, it's amazing stuff. I also wanted the boyfriend. I had Carl the boyfriend.
Yeah.
Because you were saying to me, you made the point that you were drawing lots of parallels between Promethea and Marvel Man, and I felt Carl being left behind by Promethea is a lot like when the Marvel Man's host leaves his wife behind.
Yes.
Because he's like, I'm sorry, I'm no longer your husband.
Yeah.
Your husband was just my host.
Right.
Now I am this bigger thing, and I need to go off now and have sex with my my superheroine other self, and the wife gets left behind. And I felt he'd repeated that storyline a bit there, but like to good purpose. Like, I'm not saying it's derivative, but it was another echo of Marvel Man, which, as you pointed out, gets into this utopian longing that Promethea delivers us to.
Well, I think there are throwbacks, like I said, to the Swamp Thing sex issue, and even something we haven't really mentioned is there have been Prometheas throughout history. So there was like a Little Nemo type Promethea character, and there was a Wonder Woman type Promethea character, which is another Alan Moore thing, is to have legacy characters that have appeared multiple times, and it seemed like it was just going to be another riff on that initially, before it turned into a whole other the thing. The thing I wanted to see if I can find the scene of Carl. Oh yeah, so Carl, I just love this guy. I felt like, so he had this girlfriend, Sophie, who was incognito.
Well, she's called.
She was on the run.
She's called Jo. She calls herself Jo.
Joey,
Joey,
yeah,
that's it.
Yeah. So then she's forced into being turned into Promethea by a fight with Tom Strong, basically. Yeah. And she comes back to say goodbye to Carl, and he says to her, "You're Promethea, the science heroine from New York. You're out of my league now, right?" And she says, "Yes," in that voice, that strange, archaic voice of hers. And he says, "That's okay, Joy, you always were." I love that to death. And then later on the same page, he says, "Jesus, Joy, this is fucked up. I mean, you're like the horniest thing I've ever seen, and I feel like I'm talking with my mom." Which is how I felt about Promethea the whole way through. I was like, it's amazing to me how beautiful she was, but non-sexualized. And even in the sex issue, it felt very non-sexual to me in some way. I don't know if this is a personal thing.
No, I think a lot of people have responded to that issue. We talked about it before in this show. It initially starts off with a sense of mild disgust or revulsion, but as it progresses, you get to a point where it's just really gentle and affectionate.
Yeah, and she says she likes him at the end. It's not like she's like, "I like you, Jack," and he's like, "I like you too."
Yeah. But he's killed previous Prometheas. And when you mentioned all the different Prometheas, the pantheon of Prometheas, the other thing I thought of when I was reading this for the second time was it's kind of like the Doctors in Doctor Who.
Right.
Because you've got all the different versions of the Doctor, and they're all still alive in different time streams.
Right.
Like, they're still there.
Yeah.
But the Doctor continues to reincarnate and have new hosts. But the Master refuses to reincarnate. The Master will only reincarnate at the last resort. He tends to rot or decay because he's hanging on. Whereas the Doctor embraces death and renewal and all this. The Master doesn't. And I thought there was, Moore was maybe doing a thing when Faust first appears. That Faust is the Master and Promethea is the Doctor who keeps coming back, and then Faust has killed her. I think twice. But they don't. I love that the Promethea, Bill, who's a comic book writer artist who transformed himself into Promethea and in the immaterial is a woman, is Promethea, likes him, like actually recommends him to Sophie, going, no, talk to Jack, he's nice, I liked him.
Yeah. There's nobody two-dimensional in it. I mean, everybody, there's kind of good and bad aspects to everybody.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Even the person who kills Bill, Bill still loves him. Like, Bill forgives him.
Yes. That's an astonishing thing, right? And it's almost like the comedian in Watchmen, where there's this horrific thing, but there's still this inexplicable human connection.
Yeah, which a lot of people have a problem with.
Of course people have a problem with it. And there was an angry letter about issue 10 where somebody complained that it was a cliche to have the hot girl with the old man.
Yeah.
But the same letter also complained that the desire to not use a condom was some sort of frat boy kind of perversion.
I remember that.
Which I thought was a weird... I'm sure lots of people enjoy sex without condoms. I don't know if it's necessarily that perverse. But anyway... So there was some negativity around it, but Swamp Thing is gross too, and Abby had maybe that was gross. I don't know, but anyway, Promethea was. That brings me to another thing, which is there's one thing that I really disliked about this book, and that is that all the swearing is replaced with random symbols like comic book symbols.
Yep.
There is a guy gets his brains blown out in this book, and there is nudity throughout. And I'm like, anybody who's offended by cursing is going to be offended by the nipples too. So I really didn't. I want to know what was the editorial mandate that demanded that they could have nudity and gore, but not say shit.
Do you actually see nipples in this? Because there's usually like little floaty star things in the way.
There are. No, there absolutely are. And it's more and more later. The later you get, the more... At first, there's a nipple slip, and I was like, the editors didn't notice that one. But then several issues later, I was like, oh, wait a second, it's going on all the time. And it's like they just don't... They don't care. It's there all over the place, for sure.
I'm just thinking of... Because I just watched Altered Carbon, and... I liked how the nakedness of the characters in Altered Carbon wasn't sexualized at all, because it's all about people trading in human bodies. So they're just pieces of meat.
Right.
So you have a number of male actors walking on camera just bollock out.
Yeah.
And it's just like, hi. There's no attention paid to it at all,
right.
Which I really enjoyed, with the exception of the main actor, Joel Kinnaman, who whenever he's fully naked, there's always like a leg draped over his crotch, or maybe he's standing in front of a potted plant or something.
Right.
He's the only one. I was like, what's wrong, Joel? Everyone else is just hanging out there. What's the problem? I was thinking of poor Jack Faust when he gets naked in that issue. He's really embarrassed about his penis size.
Yeah.
Like he's saying, well, here it is. And And Promethea's like, oh no, I like it. And it comes down to shame,
yes.
Because that's what I think this is about. And I think what Moore is trying to say is like, because again we have the Jack's point about like you can imagine us having sex on a disgusting mattress, or maybe we're in the stars, like it depends how you look at it. So he says that, but he is slightly ashamed by his body.
Yes.
And Moore is saying like don't be like why are you like just enjoy the act itself, enjoy sex, and then like maybe we can evolve as a society if we leave some of these sexual hang-ups behind us.
We should
like
point, a lot. Sorry, go ahead. Go.
I
was going to say we should point out. I don't know if you actually said it, but it is like about tantric sex, and it's not. It's so unsexual, much like the Swamp Thing issue, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying. Like I spotted all the nudity in it, and it's often there's that one Promethea. I think the one that from World War I that appeared in the trenches, and she's only got like a kind of cloth around her, and like you see a lot of nudity around her, but for some reason it was like never salacious. Like it was not titillating. J.H. Williams is not the kind of artist who's like They were beautiful. They were like statues. Anytime you saw them, they were like Greek statues or something like that, and you were just in awe of them rather than turned on by them. And I've never I don't remember seeing that in other comics where it was like there were nude women that were not in some way sexualized. But again, maybe that's my interpretation.
Yeah, it's funny because like when I was talking about issue 22, that and the issue which is it's basically an issue all about ejaculation. That the way Barbara and Promethea appear in that issue did look slightly pornographic. There was this sort of nod to the stylized poses of women in pornography, but it's also that's just an aside, because then you've got the idea of, well, they're actually enjoying themselves and they're enjoying feeling good, and it's not about porn. It's about how this is how we visualize sexual pleasure, porn. And I kind of thought, okay, there's an idea there. He's saying something there about sex positivity and maybe getting away from the idea of porn being automatically grubby. And maybe if we get away from that, maybe it will stop being grubby. Maybe you can actually have more artful pornography.
I think it's another instance where he's kind of done it better and briefer in Promethea than he did in Lost Girls.
Yeah, which again, as you say, it attacks that same notion. I listened to a podcast. I was trying to do some due diligence on this topic before we started recording. I listened to a podcast all about Promethea. As you say, there's not that many, and they got into this whole discussion as to whether or not Alan Moore is feminist or can a man be feminist, and they were going on and on about that. And that's not a discussion I'm particularly interested in, but I do think Promethea is counter-chauvinist. Like, I think it's trying to reject the more, as you say, sexualized aspects of comic book art and challenge them to be more rewarding, or maybe a little more interesting, a little more imaginative. And so when you have the nude in Promethea, it typically isn't sexualized, but it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And what does that mean to you as a reader? What are you experiencing? Are you aroused by this, but not in a embarrassed, shameful way? So like there's as a series, like you've got all this discussion of imagination, you've got this discussion of creativity, but it is also a series about sex and about how sex is creative and how sex can be imaginative.
Well, certainly not even beyond the physical act. I mean, there's constantly this male and female, I don't want to say energy because it's too simplified, but concepts which are married together at various stages in the tree.
Yeah.
It's
again bowls and wands.
Yes.
Lots of bowls and lots of wands.
Yes. It's just like it's almost like I don't know how to articulate it. It's like you can't have one with the other is also too simplified. It's more.
Waiter, I've some symbolism in my soup.
Yeah.
Be quiet or everyone will want some.
It's more like, I don't know, like the existence itself is these two things. It's not that it needs these two things, that's what it is. It's these two forces. You don't even have to call them male and female, just call them these two forces, and they're They are what every aspect of existence is.
Yeah. And, that, like, as you say, there's an interest in the book in exploring what is masculine, what is feminine. Bill dies because Bill's lover couldn't get over the fact that his Promethea was actually a man.
Yeah.
And then Bill is a woman. Like, in Bill's ideal self, Bill is a woman. Bill then encounters one of the five swell guys who is constantly addressed as a man.
Yes.
But is a woman.
Yeah.
Which is never, I don't think that, and you're talking about maybe, did war change anything? But I don't think they ever actually addressed that. Like, they never explain what's going on there.
Right.
But when Bill encounters that character, he's like, oh, we should talk. Like, there's this recognition that, oh, okay, yeah, we should, we've got something in common. So presumably that character was a man, but is now a woman, but nobody's addressing it. Like, they're just not talking about it. Like, they're pretending it didn't happen almost.
Yes.
So there is this sense in the series that, again, it's that notion of, do you want the limited perspective or do you want the wider, broader perspective?
Mm-hmm.
And male and female is a limited category. There are a broader array of experiences, and the series sort of touches on that as we go through. Stacia as well, like Stacia.
Yeah.
Like, we haven't talked about her at all. Stacia's friend, who is also a doing
Sophie's
an academic
friend.
paper. So sorry, Sophie's friend Stacia is also a comics academic, but she did her thesis all on, as Moore describes, the inexplicably celebrated Weeping Gorilla.
Yeah.
And she loves Weeping Gorilla because she's like, it doesn't have to mean anything. It's nonsense. It doesn't matter. Which I think is almost a metaphor for her repression, but also she continually is abusive to Sophie. She keeps calling her a lesbian.
I love this. So this is the thing where, especially in the first issue and a few later, I was like, she's constantly calling Sophie a dyke or a lesbo or something like that, or gay, as an insult, pretty much.
As an insult.
She's her friend, but it's an insult. Yeah. And I remember there was a letter around issue 2 or 3. Somebody was complaining about the book being homophobic. Now,
yes. And the podcast I just listened to, exact same thing. They were saying, why is she an awful person? Why is she such a homophobe?
All right, I'm going to say this. As soon as I read, not that letter, when I was reading these issues, I was like, Stacia's gay.
Yes.
That was the first thing that stuck into my head. And the reason I thought that was because of Chasing Amy, where there were all those dick jokes. And it was like, actually, this guy's making all the dick jokes because he's gay. And I was like, Stacia's actually gay. And she did turn, and then I saw this letter and I was like, this is kind of a weird letter. I mean, if you know anything about Alan Moore, he's not, I mean, he was living with his wife and his girlfriend for a while, and he was, one of the protesting article. Her girlfriend, sorry.
Yeah.
And he was leading the charge against all these anti-gay. Anyway, all the anti-gay legislation that was happening in the UK in the 80s, and I thought that's a weird letter, but then it was still in the back of my mind. Stacia's gay, right? And then it kind of disappears for a while, and even the insults. Well, she was less in the book, but it just seemed a little bit less. And then I noticed, and then I was like, oh yeah, then it happened. It's revealed, right? Like she gives in to her true self. And I thought it was great.
Yeah, and her fate. What happens to her when the feds shoot her and take her into custody, and then pump her full of pills? And when Promethea rescues her, like, she's overweight and she's confused, and I think they put her on lithium. And again, like, her situation there is this commentary on how we treat women who try to have a different experience of themselves, or maybe don't fit into the mold of what a good woman is, and she gets sectioned for it, and it's really distressing.
Yes.
So when the revelation happens and we meet her again, and she's dating the Fed, and they're both out as lesbians. But then she's still dodgy as, because apparently Grace, who was one of the Prometheas who inhabited her, is occasionally taking part in their sex life,
right?
And the Fed doesn't know.
Oh, I shouldn't laugh about that, but that is crazy.
Like, Stacia, you are such a creep.
That
like
is
you're
crazy.
Still problematic. Yes. Like even in the utopian afterlife of the world.
And you think about the way she was insulting Sophie by calling her gay and a lesbo, and now she's secretly having non-consensual gay, forcing this other woman to have non-consensual gay sex. It's crazy. Yeah, it is totally crazy. You're right. I shouldn't laugh about it, but it's...
But it's just, again, I think it's a depiction of a character.
Yeah.
This is the character.
Yes.
And I think, unfortunately, and it's gotten worse now, but like I think there can be a very reactionary response to some things. As a whole, Promethea examines all of these ideas and lays them out for you, and doesn't invite your judgment. Like it's not about you feeling superior to these characters. Like this is who they are. This is what these characters are doing. Yeah. And I think that's a feature of good storytelling.
Yes.
Whereas I think bad storytelling is where you would introduce a character like that and then punish them.
Yes.
You know, which, like, look, not to belabor the point, but the scene with the two demons torturing the taxi driver with his guilt because he is a sex abuser, he's abused children, and he kills himself as a result. That is, you know, a shocking scene, and some of the discussion I was listening to, they criticized that scene because they're saying it's unnecessary. Why bring that up? Why introduce that? Number one, why is it unnecessary? You know, why is somebody who is this horrible person killing himself because he's confronted with his crimes? Why is that unnecessary in this story? But two, there is a degree of empathy as well for him, like the horror he experiences, which is not to forgive him, which is not to say he's a good person. He's not. He's a horrible person. But we can't but help but feel for him in that moment. You know, you have done this horrible, horrible thing, and you've just been confronted with. You've just realized the full scope of what you've done because these demons are able to. They can see through your bullshit, and then he takes his life. So there's empathy as well as a sense of, well, good. And that's a difficult line to walk, and maybe Moore doesn't always succeed, but that's what he's aiming for. You know, don't judge, just see who these people are, these characters I've depicted. And that's a brief tableau. I think that's like 3 panels on a page.
Yeah.
You know, but I feel like we experience the guilt and the shame and the horror in those 3 panels.
Yes.
And that's, you know, really compelling stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, is there anything else we want to add? I should mention, I failed to mention that the Scrabble issue is 1 panel.
Oh my god. Yes.
And I do want to say, for the longest time, even though I haven't read this in 15 years, if you ask me, I would always say it's my second favorite Alan Moore book behind From Hell.
Yeah.
I think it's still so. I think I was a bit blindsided by the return to the superhero stuff at the end. I think only because you need to have a bit of an inside track. But it's the same with like the Love Bunglers. If you haven't been reading, it is maybe the greatest comic we've seen in 10 years, but if you haven't read at least 10, 20 years of Love and Rockets, it's not going to add up to anything. I feel like I feel a bit confused about the superhero stuff coming back at the end, but I still think it's maybe the most phenomenal, one of the most phenomenal comics there is.
You know, when the end of the world happens, there has to be a superhero crossover. So it's kind of...
Yes, that's true.
It's like mandatory.
That is true. And I do believe it did, you know, the last issue of Tom Strong was Promethea dealt with this stuff, as I recall, because he found out that Savine was his brother through the revelation.
Wow.
And that was revealed in an issue of Tom Strong where they're in that room with Promethea where she's talking to every single person on Earth. I don't know what to say about it. It's just an amazing beautiful thing. And like me, you don't have to give a shit about any of the occult stuff in it, and it's still a mind-bending, life-changing comic. And I cannot fucking believe that DC thinks they can pick up the baton, even if it's their copyright. Say, put out some goddamn posters or something, or reprint it. What the hell are they doing?
Here's I'm really happy that we got to talk at length about this series, and anyone listening maybe can hear from the different paths we've gone down, the different rabbit holes we've gone down, magic and literature and comic art and sex and all that, all of that. That's how dense this series is. That's how much it offers.
Yeah.
And if you haven't read Promethea, I would strongly recommend you go out and get it. I understand that the absolute editions are no longer in print, which is a shame because they look stunning. But the actual graphic novels are. You can still get them, and it's all on Comixology as well.
There was supposed to be a omnibus printed landscape.
Wow!
And that got canceled. It would have been the greatest thing we've ever seen. Somehow it fell apart. I'm going to recommend people track down the issues. I still think laying them flat is the best way to read them, especially even like issue 12, like the Scrabble Tarot, whatever issue. If you can lay that out flat, I feel like it's a slightly better experience than reading it in. Well, I've got the hardcovers. I don't know if the softcover opens up a bit easier, but anyway.
Yeah, and I thought it was important for us to maybe have this discussion and then show how rewarding Promethea as a series was the two of us as readers, as opposed to just doing a show all about, the shame of it, the insult to the honor of Williams and Moore by Steve Orlando and Neil Edwards.
Who are these people?
But look, as I said to you before, I feel they've been given their marching orders. I feel that's what this Justice League storyline was. It was like, just come up with a reason to feature this character, this property in the book, so that and I thought they tried to create a scenario which would make sense for Promethea to become involved. But I don't think I even described to you the funniest bit, which is they meet Promethea. Promethea sort of arrives out of materia, to fight Saritzia, however I pronounce her name, the Queen of Fables. And she has a quick fight with her. And she has a one-to-one with one of the characters who's been narrating this story to us and having a bit of a crisis. And Promethea it helps her with her crisis. And then she seems to she goes away. And the heroes beat the villain. And then Promethea returns. And they're saying, why did you go away? Why didn't you help us? And she says, you're the heroes of this story. You're the protagonists. So it's your job to actually win. So it's this meta commentary that Promethea is aware of what the rules of storytelling are. So she can't be, she's not the hero of this story. So she can't be the one to end the fight. They have to end the fight because that's the genre they're in. Whereas she's from a higher genre.
Well, there are some knockdown, drag-out fights in Promethea, like the one against Tom Strong, and also Promethea versus Promethea in one issue.
Yeah.
It's a bit I don't know. I can't even. End of sentence.
I just can't even. You're turning into Stacia.
Yeah.
You're gonna be calling me a lesbian. Oh, Emmet, you're such a les. But I just thought it was important for us to maybe celebrate the book.
Oh yeah.
Promethea.
Absolutely.
And point people to it and go, look, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what your interest is vis-a-vis comics and art and literature or whatever, there's probably going to be something here that's a hook for you.
Yeah.
And which is not to say it's for everybody. I think it's a very divisive book, but it's the kind of book that will get a reaction out of you, and sometimes that's more than what most books are offering.
Absolutely.
Just to get a reaction.
Yeah. And as I said, for me, it was more than a reaction. It was really, it got into my brain and felt like it rewired it. And I'm not sure if I got the message at the end, like she questions who did and who didn't, who ignored it, but certainly it's in there, and it has stuck with me for a very long time.
Very good.
All right.
Well, I'm going to be like the weeping gorilla and go cry somewhere about how Alan Moore's concepts just get brushed off and shoved into some mediocre storylines. A weeping gorilla, why can't they just let Alan Moore write?
I have to say, Weeping Gorilla was kind of the comment that Weeping Gorilla was actually sad, which they go into the Immateria and they meet the Weeping Gorilla in person because
he's apathy.
It's actually sad that his sadness is a joke, and it's like, oh yeah, that's the world we live in. Yeah, astonishing.
Promethea is published by Vertigo. Thanks to our patrons for supporting Deconstructing Comics and our other podcasts. To join them, go to patreon.com/deconcomics. Patrons get access to podcasts about the early years of The Amazing Spider-Man, Jim Starlin's run on Captain Marvel, and more. Are you making a comic? Send it to us and we'll do a Critiquing Comics episode about it. The 2018 Deconstructing Comics theme is from bensound.com. Next week, an all-new episode of Critiquing Comics. Jason and I discuss Jane Jett Book 1, Nuclear Shadows by writer Amal Desai and artist Paul Essenson, a book that recalls Dave Stevens' Rocketeer. And Adam joins me to discuss the first 2 issues of the post-apocalyptic The Fog Within by writer Sean Wood and artist David Dion. Until then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.